Amy, I don't know if Doug would object. I defer to you and Christine on this, but the other members do have a copy of the document that Christine forwarded to me after your subcommittee meeting last week.
Mhm.
So if it's in the interest of time, if you think it's okay for Christine to just walk through what's in there, maybe provide a bit of voiceover and let Doug join from there. That would be okay from my point of view, gentlemen. I don't know if that's okay with you, but we could always let some time for Doug to join as well. But just in the interest of time, I thought that would be great. I know I have a hard stop at 10, so
That's fine with me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So everyone has a copy. Should I share my screen or does everyone have a copy of it?
I have a copy.
Open. Yeah.
Okay. Should we just open this up to questions, or do you, and I know you don't need to read through the, Gerard, did you give an overview?
Only very high level to give a sense that this was your framework thinking, given some reasonable scenarios to guide the conversation both with the community school committee and about the budget. So it's not that these are resolutions that are fully hemmed in right now. There are a few miles to go before we get to a solid number. But I for one found, I had a few questions about the language being used and how the numbers were being characterized, the bus revenue being one of them, for instance. So I think a quick overview for mechanics like that might be helpful. These guys are smarter than I, so perhaps they've already got it figured out. But so that's why I suggest.
So let's just give an overview of how we got here. So as you know, last fiscal year, we were shut down for 61 days, almost right after we passed a school committee budget that did not even fathom what COVID-19 was going to do to the Wakefield public schools. So fortunately, we were able to make some adjustments to the budget. We were fortunate to receive COVID one-time funding from both state and federal sources that helped us create a hybrid plan that we are currently in for fiscal 21. So that prompted probably, I think in the fall, right, Amy, fall and early winter, we started talking about how are we ever going to start talking about what a fiscal 22 budget's going to look like when we don't know. Are we going to be fully back in? Are we going to continue hybrid? Are we going to have a new, as it's been called, a hybrid? Like what is it going to look like? We know we're dealing with learning loss. We know we're dealing with social emotional. We know we're dealing with remote learning. Zoom is never going to go away. We know we're still, even if we're fully back, we're still going to have parents that still are going to insist on some sort of remote services. So I think the Finance and Facilities Subcommittee last fall said to Doug and I, why don't we just start with overview of three possible budget scenarios about what fiscal 22 could look like. So we went back and we kind of looked, I don't know, there's an acronym that I use, it's called TIMS for school finance. It stands for Transportation, Instruction, Meals, and Safety. And those are the four buckets that we use to sort of frame the budget. And we looked from a high level about what each scenario would impact on those four buckets. And those were the framework of these three scenarios. Oh, here's Doug now. Hi, Doug.
Good morning.
I was just giving a high-level overview of how we came up with the three scenarios. So your timing is perfect.
Good. Morning, everybody.
Hey, Doug.
I apologize that I'm a minute late. I'm just coming from another call.
No, thanks
No
for squeezing
worries.
us in.
Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Jim, how was Florida? Welcome back.
Florida was good. It was good. A lot of masks. Not what you see on TV.
Good.
But yeah,
Good.
got back, no problem. So thank you. Yep.
So I don't want to interrupt conversation that if you've already started, but I'm happy to kind of tell you where I think we are on the school side, and then kind of talk about any questions that you might have for us, and what guidance that you might also have for us as we think about preparing our budget, and what questions that you and FinCom might have as well.
So I was just about to go into scenario one. And just to step back also, as you all remember, last year, the school department's budget was cut by $400,000 going in. So the school committee approved a budget that included that 400,000, and the town cut the 400,000. So all three scenarios replace that 400,000 back into the budget. For us, that 400,000 represents 5 positions, 3 for special ed and 2 for science positions that we were negotiating with the teachers union, and we included in the collective bargaining agreement that we would institute in grades 3 and 4 in our 4 elementary schools. So all 4 scenarios restore that $400,000. So the first one is basically our baseline, the fully in-person model. It's basically a baseline as if everyone's vaccinated, we're fully back, we don't have to worry about keeping 3 to 6 feet apart, we're fully back, we don't have to have the cleaning company, we're not in a hybrid model. So we're back to a traditional school year, school calendar, everyone's in. And it addresses all the collective bargaining agreements, which if you have some spare time and want to dig into those, they're all on our website. So that's about a 4.37% increase from 21 to 22. And then the document sort of breaks down for the 4 buckets: transportation, instruction, meals, and safety, what that means for all 4 categories. So I could pause here. Does anyone have any questions about scenario 1?
So you say instructions go down by 792. Is that what?
So what in our current hybrid model, we have 16 remote positions. We have teachers, paraprofessionals, an additional nurse, and 2 additional custodians. So we had to hire 16 additional FTEs to fully complement our hybrid model. So in scenario 1, to the cost of almost $800,000. So scenario 1 would reduce that because we wouldn't have all 16 remote positions. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yeah, I'll be curious to understand on an instructional side what the year-over-year change is going to be, but keep going.
So
Can I just ask, so thematically for me, and I apologize if this is obvious, Christine, and I'm not getting it, but as it relates to the 4 buckets you mentioned, in each scenario, it doesn't pop for me, you know, using your acronym, how much up, how much down?
So it's, see where it says financial implications from changing model to in-person? Transportation revenue is generated $115,000. We did not collect any transportation fees this year. For us, that's usually $115,000. This year, currently, we're spending $792,000 for remote services. Our meals, we had to furlough 12 food service workers because we are not feeding. All we are doing are grab and go meals. So we had to furlough 12 staff. So to bring those 12 staff back would be an additional $227,000. So for scenario 1, I've highlighted the overall savings for us going to fully in-person is $869,000 of savings from where we are currently right now. And then I've highlighted the overall increase in scenario 1 from 21 to 22 for us is $1,904,300. That's where the 4.37 comes from. Does that answer your question, Bill?
I apologize.
So let me just, this is a working document for
Yeah, so I'm not trying to be difficult. I just, you know, this is my first time sitting with you guys. I'm just trying to.
So let me just explain. This is a working document to give our subcommittee a high level understanding of our 4 large buckets. of course, if you, we have detail and backup to dig deeper into all of those lines, but this is just to highlight for you how we're possibly going to come back. Is it fully in person? Is it hybrid? And maybe a combination of the two.
Yeah, I'm I guess, and again, I apologize that I'm just trying to do the math to get to the $1.9 million increase and see how that appears in those.
So the 1.9 is not, that's the collective bargaining agreements for all 7 of our units.
Okay, so that's specifically for collective bargaining only.
So if you read at the top, right, the 1.9. So the
Yeah.
1.5 is the overall increase from 21 to 22. The largest percentage of that is collective bargaining agreements.
1.9 represents all collective bargaining and 5 positions.
Yes, and we have a couple of fixed cost increase. We're in a contract with our transportation vendor. That goes up. We have contract with some of our contracted services. So in total for our budget, to meet all of our needs and to keep us whole, it's $1.9 million. But
and your point is, as you're just saying, that isn't just the 5 new positions, et cetera. It's all of the contractual upgrades and whatever, and lanes and
right.
Steps and
lanes,
everything else.
No, we can dig deeper into, right?
But the 4 buckets you called out just shows the change going from where you are today to this scenario. And then the total at the bottom is all in CBA, paper, printers, the whole 9 yards. Yep.
It's to give you a baseline of how we fund Wakefield Public Schools. So if we do nothing with hybrid, if we just meet our contractual obligations for both personnel and vendors, and we just keep everything that we have, plus the 5 positions, we're at 4.37. Okay.
And
Bill, you
my
good?
question,
Mhm.
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Bill?
Keep going. I'm struggling a little, but I apply again. Perhaps it's only me, so I'll keep listening.
Bill, do you have a copy of last year's budget?
I think I do. Yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of,
The budget book.
yes.
Yeah, I do, Christine. Yeah.
Okay. It sort of frames an outline of how we do our budget at
Okay.
Wakefield.
Yeah.
Okay. So scenario 2.
Christine,
Mhm.
quick question. What are your thoughts on how likely it is that scenario 1 will come to fruition?
So can we go through all 3 until
Sure,
we?
absolutely. I'll hold my questions.
And then we can talk about what we hope and pray is going to happen.
No problem.
So scenario 2 is if we continue what we're currently doing. And I know no one likes scenario 2. Scenario 2 assumes that all of our one-time COVID-related grants are no longer in existence because DESE has told us they're not continuing. It's one-time funding. It was to help you open school, to get you back, to not put people on these grants, but is a bridge to get us to where we need to be, which is fully back in school. So this is continuing the hybrid model, which, as I don't know if you know our schedule of hybrid, our elementaries, we have a cohort that comes in the morning and a cohort in the afternoon, and a cleaning company that does a deep clean 4 days a week in between the cohorts. We have that. We've had to, for socially distance, we had to move furniture out to storage containers at all of our schools. There's a monthly cost for that. And we've had to hire the 16 remote staff in order to fully staff this hybrid model. So all of those items, plus the furlough of the food service staff and transportation, we were not able to provide any transportation to the high school students this year. And they all provide revenue when they purchase their bus passes. So for us, that was a devastating loss of $115,000. So in order to continue hybrid and only having half of the populations in at any one time in order to socially distance, it's an additional $3.2 million from 21 to 22. And the only reason we were able to afford this in 21, again, I just need to stress, is that we were the recipients of 7 COVID-related grants. Again, one-time funding. Does anyone have any questions on scenario 2? I know no one likes to talk about scenario 2. Scenario 3. It's hopefully we're all vaccinated. We are able to bring students in. We can increase the capacity that are on our buses. We can offer high school students transportation. So it's almost like a remote model with fully back in person with a fully remote hybrid. I don't even know how to in person with some remote instruction is what I characterized as. So we are hoping to maintain 11 of the 16 positions, which includes the 5 that were cut for 21, 3 remote teachers, keeping the 2 additional custodians and the 1 nurse. Brings us to the 11 additional FTE from 21 to 22. We're fortunate for the food service program. If we're fully back, we're able to serve meals again in person. We were able to bring back all the 12 staff that we furloughed for this year. So overall, because we were also able to generate revenue, and we don't have to pay the $190,000 for the cleaning company and the storage facilities, where the increase between scenario 1 and 3 is $2.1 million. So I'll pause right there for a second.
So my questions were going to be, one, what was the effect of COVID? Like, what kind of funding were we able to get through whatever programs were available to us, which you've answered, and then what the current betting is on how things are likely to go.
So I think, Brian, we are anticipating that there is still going to be some kind of after effects of COVID. We are anticipating the need to continue some type of remote instruction. Currently, we have almost 400 students that are in a full remote model. Okay, we have just shy of 3,500 students enrolled. And we have essentially a cohort the size of Dolbear Elementary that are learning remotely, right? Now, we take attendance for those students every day. There are administrators that oversee and evaluate the teachers in that program. We've developed different curricula for those students. And so we are anticipating that come fall, that some portion of those students, we're anticipating and we're hopeful that the majority of those students will be coming back to school. However, we are anticipating that for medical reasons, and communication that we've already had from special education and from parents, some parents still feel like medically their child or children plural may not be able to come back until there's more kind of security and safety for their children in regard to COVID. So we're anticipating that some remote instruction would need to continue, which puts us more on track with scenario 3, which I've heard Christine say, which I kind of like, is kind of a hybrid of the hybrid.
I'm sorry, no, that sounds, it makes sense. What was the total number that are fully remote at this time again? I missed that number. It's
just shy of 400. I can get you the exact number because it's changing, right?
Yep.
As COVID is becoming less, we're seeing a steady, very small, but some students are starting to migrate back to in-person teaching and learning, right? And so, I think these scenarios are kind of, we've never kind of budgeted like this or presented like this in the past, right? We've gotten, into the grainy details. We've never come up with, scenarios. We've never needed to. one of the reasons why we're trying to kind of communicate in this space is just to talk about the complexity and the unknowns, right? And so what's not in here, and something that I need to share, is that there are still questions for us about special education in regard to balancing the budget this year and accessing the stabilization fund. And also moving forward, what are the additional costs going to be? Okay.
It's really interesting because, I mean, the fact is that we have enough trouble pinpointing special education spending each year. And this just adds a whole new layer of complexity to,
Correct.
we have no idea really where the world is going to be in 6 months.
Right. And so the other part of this, and it's important to note in that same regard, Brian, in terms of knowns and unknowns, when we present our budget to school committee, we're not going to present scenarios. We're going to present, what we think is the best case scenario. And we'll go from there. And that falls into the same space of us budgeting and the commitments that we've made both to FinCom and to the town council, that we will kind of budget for what is known, and we will collaborate and work from there. So just
I would just like to chime in too. We have a list that we're going to present about knowns and unknowns, but I know, and Gerard, we discussed this last week. I know there's been some question about, well, you must have saved some money somewhere, right? I've gotten this question because you're not fully in person 5 days a week. Did you save any money anywhere? We saved, I would probably say there's 3 categories we probably saved some money this year. Transportation, because we did not bus for athletics, unfortunately. We did not bus for extracurricular, unfortunately. And we saved on stipends because, again, we weren't able to offer the extracurricular opportunities that were normally available to our students. And we did see a slight decrease in a few of our utilities. However, what we didn't expect was the unknown costs that we didn't even put on our COVID-related grants that we had to pay from our local budget from those savings. We had to pay for an additional legal fees because we had to negotiate an MOU with 3 of our 7 bargaining units because we had change in working conditions. So we had increased legal costs for that. We had to increase building maintenance. We had to do, I don't know if we've heard about the Bala report. We had to hire a company, an outside company, to make sure that our buildings were safe to have people in, to make sure our HVAC was up to par. We had to invest, along with DPW, who's been an amazing partner in this, we had to invest in our facilities. We had to bring things up to par, and we had to fast forward things that were on probably a 1 to 3 year plan, then became a 6-month plan. So all of those things wiped out any possible savings we made in fiscal 21. We've had additional requests for contracted services. We've had additional requests for additional services for tutoring, intervention services. So things that were not in the original budget that we've had to make adjustments and reallocations all along. And school committee has just said to Doug and I, look, whatever you need, we know we have to meet these needs and we're adjusting moving forward. But again, trying to understand for next year, we're hoping to meet all of these needs, but we're very conscious of the fact that the $1.5 million of COVID-related grants we received is not going to happen again.
Or at least it's not reliable at this point. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll just offer for the others on the call. I did mention to them on our little quick call last week that I made this point. Christine, I'll just say, remember, I was asking, or I made that point for you guys just to think about the momentum of thinking on our full committee. So you guys on the school committee and in the administration know those details. My ask of you is let's not combine those two and make the point that they cancel out already. They're going to need to hear a bit of a breakout, and I think you've heard some of the guys here talking about that as well, right? So we know that's true in Sensible, but what they know from last year is, foregone Leslie revenue, things like that, obvious PPE needs and all that kind of stuff. But they will be thinking, well, okay, variable costs are generated by activity, so they must be, must be some, just so when you're communicating to the full committee, it'd be my guidance that you just spend a moment to break it out, specifically identify, yep, that is a small thing, but it gets blown away by these other costs. I know I'm
Right.
coaching the conversation a little bit here, forgive me for that, but I think there's value there, right? To keep some of our guys who know the details of school operations over many years of FinCom participation, parenthood, whatever. But I just, as an approach, that would be my counsel, and we can take the conversation in the right direction. If we ameliorate the cost savings with the huge COVID costs, it's not going to allow people to reconcile in their own minds with what is kind of obvious.
Sure.
So just
Yeah,
a
thank
strategic
you.
point from my point of view. Yeah,
Thank you,
Right.
Jack.
And I think this goes back to Bill's initial questions,
right.
right?
Exactly.
Which goes back to Gerard, your questions when you attended our meeting. You said, I think your exact words were, excuse the CPA in me. What's the debits and credits, right? Like, so how is this presented? And in regard to our presentation, both to school committee and to FinCom, we will do our best to break those things out. And I think our hope is that by continuing our conversation with you all, that you will help us refine our presentation and the information that we need to kind of bring forward to highlight, Bill, as you say, make it pop. When Gerard said debits and credits and you say make it pop, I'm thinking that those are closely related,
Yeah, the ins and outs. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So the other piece that's not clearly articulated in this kind of working document is, how we have rearranged personnel, right? What some districts have done, for example, if we think about Dolbear having about 400 students, they have about 435. But if we think about kind of a remote school and students with all types of needs in a remote setting, if you think about the staff at Dolbear, we're looking at a staff of about 60 people that run a school, or about 435 kids, right? And so if you think about moving 400 students to a remote setting, and you think about staffing a full remote school, other districts have done a number of different things to kind of staff their remote schools. Some districts have reassigned staff and just moved them right out of their in-person classroom. Other communities have just taken and subscribed to online educational services. For example, things like Ingenuity, which comes at a premium. It's a very expensive program, but then they just hire adults to oversee kids in their participation of a subscription service, right? We didn't do any of those things. In fact, what we did do in regard to managing our personnel, we did not fill our remote positions. We waited as long as we could. Then we posted the positions internally for personnel that may need to teach remote, not want to teach remote, but may need to teach remote because of a pre-existing medical condition that they needed to demonstrate for us. Okay. There were several teachers that wanted to teach remotely that were unable to, because we were not just letting people choose, right? There was a process. So, when Christine talks quickly about, 16 remote positions, for some districts some districts our size, those number of remote positions are many more than 16. Again, that does not represent how we've moved adults from non-teaching positions to teaching positions. It doesn't reflect how we've, reallocated positions in FTEs. And PS, all of these changes have had to be negotiated with our unions, right? So this is a change in working conditions. So all of the way that teachers are working this year had to be negotiated separately. And that includes supervision and evaluation. It includes leave. It includes, any number of things that they do. So for example, we're now looking at increasing student time, right? as COVID becomes less, we're looking at Wednesdays at the elementary, for example. That was a kind of a deep cleaning day and a day for us to kind of have teacher meetings. We are now working with our union leadership to have that be an in-person day for half of the time. So 2 of the 4 Wednesdays a month. So I just add this information not to bog down the financial conversation, but to just provide information in a greater context to some of the moving parts of this budget.
Yeah, operations drives finance. I think that's clear. Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the points I think, so I committed to everybody in this call at one point that I would probe our full membership for their thoughts, concerns, curiosities much earlier in the process than I think we've done historically. So I've done that. One of the things that came up towards the end of last night, if you will, is the year-on-year salary cost as a number. Christine, this is going to be a mechanical question, then maybe it's also an operationally driven question too. But am I right to say that if I take the header section of each of your scenarios, that's ostensibly going to be how I get to a year-on-year cost? If I take that number or percentage, increase it over last year's baseline, I can bucket things at least in that salary bucket, and then maybe some of the operational drivers that Doug was just going through. That's a different bucket. Again, just trying to predict what's the most effective way to communicate this. Salaries is obviously the first one. We know the percentage increase generally, but how it flows through. I take that first line or that header really to be the addition over last year's net of the 400,000. Is that about right? And if there's a bigger analysis, let me know.
So, so I don't know if you read the whole document, but it sort of outlines what makes up our budget.
Yep.
And over 80% of this budget is salaries.
Naturally. Yeah.
Right, but it's not everything, right? So what I'm thinking as you're saying that, Gerard, is that those increased numbers don't necessarily allow me to run a formula that shows, oh, well, if it's this amount and it's this percent, then here's what it was last year. I don't know that I can work back to that number.
So the danger with that is you're not taking into consideration the step and lanes of our.
No, I mean, that's part of it, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
has to be part of it. Understood.
So we have this year, normally, and this is my second year. In my first year, we had 33 teachers apply for advancement on step and lane. This year, because of COVID or they've had more time, I've had 43 staff request advancement on step and lane because they're taking additional courses online, there's different opportunities. So we've had to factor that in. So that's an additional increase to this budget. But yes, Gerard, to answer your question, the top header of each sort of outlines overall what this budget is. But we've also in our budget, we outline what the personnel increase year over year is. We have the 3 buckets. We present that to school committee every month as well. Personnel salaries, operation costs, and then contractual services, professional development costs. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I didn't see the breakout. I see transportation. Oh, instruction is.
Yeah, it's not on the
No,
sheet,
It's
Christine,
not on the
correct?
sheet. Yeah.
No, this is how we're building the budget, right? This
Right,
is
so
Yeah.
what-
this is step 1.
No, we get that. So what I think, one of the questions was, I don't need not to be answered now, but when we come with scenarios, it's if it's 80% of the budget, as Doug Butler asks year after year after year, what is the year over year increase for personal services, for salaries and services?
Yeah.
That's the number that the other 13 people in the room or 12 people in the room are going to probably want to know. And you just mentioned it, Christine, you have your budget is cut out and eventually you have these 3 buckets.
Yeah.
And all many of us have been looking for is the consistency to the extent that for what we see, right? We see these other budgets, they all look the same. They're all vanilla. There's no chocolate. They look identical. you come to the school department, it doesn't come in vanilla. It's a little different. Maybe it's chocolate chip. It's just,
Do we have
it's not the
sprinkles on
same. It's,
top? Sorry.
and that's what creates some angst, I think. So you mentioned it, Christine, the 3 or 4 buckets.
But I
And
think
that's all I was going to ask.
the budget book always
It-
addresses that question. I don't,
Yeah.
it was page 30.
Yep.
It addresses the
Yep.
3 buckets.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm asking for is in these scenarios, when you come to visit, we need to hear possibilities before the book gets printed. That's it.
But I think we are printing the book right now. And I think we're printing the book to present to school committee, but we are presenting one budget, Jim.
Oh, no, I get it. I
Yeah.
get it.
So,
That's fair.
and we always present what that personnel increase is in our budget book. I think, is it page
Yeah,
15?
I don't have the book in front of me, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
15's revenue sources, or 13's revenue sources. 15.
Gerard has it memorized.
No, he's looking at the book. He's not that good. I'm looking at the book too from last year, but I'm not finding that page, Christine, so.
Yeah. Yeah, but so you're right. But again, remember, we recognize how it all culminates into the book, Christina. We offer it at this time based on our
Page
commitment
25.
to give you a
Bill.
sense of, what you
25.
can expect.
Yeah, so I like the scenarios. I appreciate, what you outlined here. I think it's very helpful on me looking towards the, down the runway, if you would, as to what possibilities could be there. So Gerard, were there any other questions from the group?
No, that was it. Actually, it's funny. Doug and I had in the past talked about whether members of a FinCom wanted specific employee by employee salary numbers. And I told them I hadn't heard that yet. And as soon as I told them I hadn't heard that yet, someone asked that specific question. So Doug, my response to you is a few hours obsolete by the moment, right after we shared that. So there is, and I
Brett,
mentioned it.
can I
Doug.
have some questions
ahead.
about that, though? Specifically, what's the ask?
So we used to, in prior years, get, like we get for every department, employee by employee, just an itemization of what culminates into the salary number. And there's
So
one
are
member
you
who's asking
talking
for that.
W-2 salaries? Are you talking assignment salaries? Are you talking stipends? Are you talking, there's layers to this, right?
Yeah, I'd have to
Right,
go
your
into.
budgeted salary for Mrs. Jones. Last year she made this coming year she makes that.
We can absolutely provide that. That's fine. But what we also have many stipends that may or may not be in addition to that. So if you're asking what a
The
true,
stipends and other budget are typically depicted as separate line items. It's a roll up.
but it's also salaries.
No, I understand that.
And it's in the salary line. So if someone's trying to do a linear tie to what Christine Bafagna makes and what Christine on her W-2, it's not going to be a linear tie. We're talking calendar versus fiscal, and it's just not including all possible wages. We have staff who do tutoring, intervention services. So I'm just trying to figure out.
So again, and I'm just breaking to say, as the auditor in the room, I can see where an audit firm would want to be able to see that and tie it all through. I don't think that's what we're trying to do. It's really, as Jim was just saying, the year-on-year numbers.
No, because
going up.
I file an NDE report to DESE,
Yeah.
which this is one of their numbers. They want to know what an average teacher salary in Wakefield is, and we have to report it by school, by category. So if you're wondering what salaries at the Dolbear are, I mean, we can absolutely provide that. But if you want to know what a particular teacher at the Dolbear makes, we can also provide that. I was just wondering what the ask was.
Yeah.
So I'm a former math physics teacher, right? And so I try to put myself in your shoes. And when I get questions, one of the things that I talked to Gerard about yesterday is what's not asked, or what seems like it's just not ringing true. What is kind of, when we hear questions, I think often we think we're answering questions or directing you to where the information is. Okay. And so sometimes I think that that's a point of frustration on both sides. And I think this type of conversation is really helpful for us to kind of talk this through, because Christine's question around, what is year over, Gerard, you asked the question, right? Or we were talking about, one of the things that I was curious about is, they want names and salaries, right? For Mrs. Jones. Bill, you say, what if Mrs. Jones makes X, right? And so, right, what's not clear is looking forward is if Mrs. Jones accumulates 10 more credits and she goes from a master's step, 4 to a master's step 5 and then a master's plus 30, right? So that's a horizontal and a vertical change, right? That's captured in the contract. But to do an audit in this space, Gerard, or to make this kind of to kind of get to the grainy details, you really need to educate yourself, or we need to help answer questions and educate the committee in a way that addresses what they're most deeply concerned about, right? The other part of this, and something else that we're trying to work through, is what are the kind of held beliefs or assumptions about the school budget, right? So I get the sense, based on some of the questions that we get annually, that there are some deeply held beliefs and assumptions about the school budget. And I think it's my hope that we can start to address some of those questions to move into, and I think we were kind of hovering in this space, to move into more of a problem solving space, right? And share with you what our challenges are, right? And so anyway, I won't go on and on. I'll leave this.
Gerard, can I just ask one other thing? So Christine, I appreciate you pointing out page 25. So something helpful for me is if on that page, if you had 20 and 21 side by side compared budget 2020, budget 2021, or 2021, 2022, that would show what it was and what it is. And then
So Bill, I hear you, and we take it one step further. We've done that for every school. So if you go to the school pages.
So we could just add it up then. We could do the
Right.
school pages, add it all up, and we'd have our number, is what you're saying.
So, but we thought it would be important to show it school by school. We give you 2 years of actuals, and then the last year and this year and the delta. So we show you what's actually happening by school. And then we also have a district-wide category, because we have district-wide services, special ed, transportation, facilities, and what we've actually spent for salaries, non-salaries, actuals, and year-over-year budget.
But is there one roll-up of all that, all the schools, everything?
Yeah, go to the last page, budget totals.
Christine, would it be possible for me to share my screen for a moment? You'd have to allow me to do so.
I'm not the host.
Ah, okay.
I think Jim is the host.
Jim, me?
Jim.
I don't know who the host is.
The host might actually be Sherry.
Yeah, Sherry did the meeting. I don't.
I was just going to show you guys what we look at each year, which is exactly what you were just describing, Christine, and what Bill, you were describing, which is there was the number for professional, it's called personal services. And we see what we expended in 2019, what we expended in 2020, what we appropriated in 2020, what we appropriated in 2021, and then what we're asking for in 2022. And it allows us to see this line. And we're less interested in the school by school numbers than the overall number for all of those salaries. And when it comes to the personal salaries, we get here's what their wage was in 2021, here's what we're asking for in 2022. And there's a number we can calculate, which is the amount and the percentage, right? And so that's the level at which we're looking for that data. And I sense, Doug, what you just remarked on, which is frustration on both sides about, it seems like we're like not quite hitting here. And that's why I wanted to share my screen, so I could just show you what we're used to looking for. And perhaps it's a little intellectual laziness on our part that we don't want to have to go do the work. We like this, when we get a budget, typically it's all there and it's all boom, right there. There's the numbers. I throw a bunch of calculations in.
But Brian, do you look at the budget total summary page?
Well, I am going to educate myself on all
Yeah.
of this so that I have a better sense for where it is. But the thing is that for all the other budgets, it's in a spreadsheet already.
Yeah.
And there are pain points in getting the data out of PDFs. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's really time consuming. And having it all in a spreadsheet just makes it easy to throw our calculations in and look at those differences over time. Because our goal, as I see it, is to say, well, overall, the trend has been for the last X years, it was like this, and now it's going like this, or it's going like that, or whatever. We can see the overall trend. In my view, we're not as interested in the specific individual stuff as we are in the overall trend.
Yeah,
And
and
I'd be happy to hear anybody else talk now.
Well, Brian, I'll just jump in. You're absolutely right. And Christine, just for your benefit, what Brian's talking about is really the budgets we see from other departments. Page 60 of last year's book is the best representation of where you guys really come the closest to doing what Brian's doing. I think Pete, again, did yeoman's work last year trying to help reconcile and get us a resource so we could better map to the outcomes Brian's talking about.
So if you
However,
want 60, oh, sorry.
Sorry, to Doug's point, and I just want to make sure it's about 10 minutes left in the call, at least from my side. And I don't want to lose sight of what Doug just said, which is, hey, there are some challenges I think this group should be directionally aware of, sensitive to, for at least the first touch point with the full committee. So everything that I, Bill, or Brian are raising in terms of how to map the data and present it, I think is a bit of a longer term thing. So I do want to make sure we're leaving this conversation with the substance of some of the operational challenges, COVID response or otherwise. Make sure we're clear on that higher level stuff, guys. And I think some of the more clerical stuff I can improve on, work with Christine on, but I think this last 10 minutes is best spent on making sure Doug's conveyed all the challenges facing the schools, make sure we're clear on it. And then as we get the better mapping of the data, or more consistent with what we're used to mapping of the data, we'll have that context in mind. Is that a fair way to process? Because Doug, is that kind of what you were trying to get at? I know,
Yes,
Amy, if you want to weigh in here, but I just think with the remaining time, that would be good, because everything everyone just said about what certain members are going to ask for, they're absolutely right. But I think we need to be aligned too on a few of the operational points.
Yeah, so I think on really, so we're asking you to come twice. Would like you to come 3 times, but time is already starting to pass. And when I say come, have somebody come before the full committee, right, Gerard, to get a first pass, to get how things are going, where we think next year's budget is going to be, and then after you present to the schools, then you come back to us with the full budget, if you would. And as bluntly as I can put it, when you come for the first preliminary one, this type of thing that you presented is I think very helpful for me and would be for others. On the top of page 3, you talk about non-salary expenses. So you have salary expenses, item number 1, and then you have these other things that are drivers to your budget, right? Non-salary expenses. So my point is, when you come for the preliminary discussion, as soon as that could be, it is important to be able to articulate, we're in the range of 5 to 7 in this particular line item, and in 2 to 4 in that line item, and whatever. And the final looks like, right now, if we go with scenario 3, as is statistically likely, you're looking at 4.88. We talk out of both sides of our mouths. We want to see everybody's salary, but we want to see it at a high level. So sorry about that. But the reality is, at the meeting, when I watch the crowd, it's high level, for 2/3 and granular for 1/3. Pick a number, but we need to understand, how it phases in with the rest of the budgets, and have our arguments with Steve and others on it. So again, I think that the high levels that you described in here are very helpful. And the more we see that when you visit, the better off, I believe, the better off you will be. And if it's a range, if it's whatever, I don't know is not a budgeting process. Leave it at that. So.
one of the things on the unknowns to that is that, I could see Joanne and Doug, the people really in the financial planning, financial projection business, the true experts in the room. I think they'll wonder, Doug, is on the unknowns, are we saying that some of these scenarios are going to be knowable by town, or confidently knowable by town meeting? And so one of these are going to be the ask, or are we budgeting in buffer, if you will, to accommodate what we don't think we know for the 12 months following town meeting? You know what I mean? Like, so it's, like I said, we're in a tough spot because we have to come up with a one number ask for town meeting, but we don't know everything. So will there be buffer? What can the district, and this might be a school committee strategy point as well, is like, mechanically, how does that work? Do we think it's 2 million in salary increase, but we'll have to have another $500,000 as a buffer, not a real good term of art, in case something increases that we can't control for? You know what I mean? I think that'll be a curiosity. I know I have it. I think the experts on the committee, not that these folks are not, but Doug's a CFA, Joanne's a CFP. Like they think about things in that kind of way as well. So anyway, please.
No, so I think when we propose to school committee, and then when we come to FinCom, school committee is our first audience, right? And so they approve our budget, right? Which becomes their budget, right? That they are approving and moving forward as a committee. And so again, they're our first audience. We of course have kind of opened up and invited the subcommittee in, and Jim, I don't think we're looking to come and say, I don't know. And I know that there was some tension in last year's meeting around, FinCom looking for a percentage, and we were in the middle of negotiations, and we were working with a few percentages that we felt like that would have compromised our position in an open meeting to divulge that. There wasn't a lot of, I think, buy-in on that on the side of FinCom, right? And so, so we're looking to come in and be able to answer the questions. But in regard specifically to your question, Gerard, about, so we'll be proposing a percentage, and within the context of that percentage, for example, if we need to reallocate staff, like we would do the same thing we did this year, right? And so, for example, this year, there were costs that were not part of our budget that we needed to incur, right? There were costs with facilities, and Christine shared some of these. And it was not a little bit of money, it was a lot of money, and it affected a lot of personnel. But we did it to the degree that we could in the context of the budget that was provided, right? And we worked very, very closely with Steve Mayo and the town leadership. And we shared with Steve, this is where we're at, this is where we feel we might be coming up short. And we just kind of worked through it. And my working theory is that is exactly what my job is. And that is exactly what we would do again this year. We know we have a footprint, and we know we need to be within that footprint, and if there are extraordinary circumstances that kind of warrant us getting outside of that footprint, we would communicate early and often. I don't know if that answers your question, Gerard.
And that is actually, that early and often bit is the next part, which partly goes to Steve too, is because as I mentioned when we met last week, is we have to be considerate of the larger reserve position, the balance sheet of the town, not just the income statement.
Yep.
So it's like that's one of the things we have in mind, is like, all right, this is a budget that is assigned to you guys, but what is the risk that you have to come back, not even by fall town meeting, but say by August? What if the government says everyone comes back to school, that's a mandate, and by the way, everyone has to have N95 rated NIOSH masks, right?
Yep.
Maybe that's not a good example, I don't know, but to me that's a reasonable stocking point. And then now you got to spend $100,000 to do that. Like, where's the money come from? Are we aligned on the fact that has an impact on reserves? So that which we're committing to now may just be the starting point. How do we control for that? And is that a buffer in the budget now? Is it something we need to go back to the town for? Like, all those dynamics, I think, are in people's minds rightly. So that's why I asked the question. I think you're getting I would make that point.
I don't know that we're budgeting in a correction factor. There's no quote buffer. Where the buffer existed for us this year is as Christine described. So we didn't pay stipends for people that weren't or could not do work. Some districts did. We did not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Some districts paid people 100% across the board all year long. We did not. Right. And so some people did not furlough staff. We did. So as we have saved money, we have spent money.
Yeah.
And with that, and so that's, I think, part of what people need to know. Like, so for example, when I say if we need to reallocate staff, if we cannot open school next year, hypothetically, I believe that we will, but hypothetically, if we can't kind of open as we have in the past and letting 100% of our kids come in full time,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's going to create a delta. And in that delta, it's going to create cost needs in other areas. And we would move those savings into those other areas, which is exactly what we did this year.
And I would just also add that this option 3, is sort of the best snapshot in terms of what we do know, right? It sort of does drill down on specifically, where we're going to be. But if I had to guess in terms of like where we'll be after town meeting with the unknowns, for me, it would be special education issues, right? We haven't even begun to wrap our arms around, the deficiencies and the learning gaps and the social emotional issues, the isolation. I mean, for me, that is probably something that should really be considered in terms of trying to provide additional services for students who need them that, could be additional expenses to the district. And it's a real thing that we don't understand yet. So just a little warning on that from my 2 cents.
Maybe with the last minute, Doug, forgive me for interrupting. You did mention the need to go to stabilization this year. Dan Sherman had that, he raised in our last public meeting. Is it worth going into a little bit more detail on that now, or is that worthy of a whole different conversation? Because I think it's a present year thing, not so much a next year thing. So
it's a present year thing. I think we're working with special education right now to kind of, to figure out, there's a couple of active cases right now of students that are going out of district. And so, and other associated costs, services that students need that I think Amy brings up, right?
Yeah.
So there are some extraordinary circumstances that have been created due to COVID that we need to attend to. But in regard to your specific question about stabilization this year, we have not yet settled with a few families that we're working with to have a number of what we're going to need to balance our special education budget this year, which is the specific drivers for what will drive what the ask will be for stabilization. Okay. One of the things that just as a context, one of the things that I do not think that we will need all $500,000, and I'm trying as hard as we possibly can to keep those costs as low as they can, so that stabilization is accessible through FY23, right? Because I think we're going to be okay in 22. I think we're going to be able to continue to move things around. I think we're going to have stimulus money coming in. And I think we're going to be in like the town. I think, Steve Mayo says, I think we're going to be okay in 22. I agree with him. My concern right now is 23. And so that's just a longer term look, because I do think the more the kids get back, I think special education numbers are going to increase. I think learning loss is really going to start to be documented in a way that is going to require us to provide additional services outside of the school day. I think that that's real. And I think that those are the things that we're looking to kind of figure out how to make that work. And we have some plans for that as well. Fortunately, we have some grant money that we've been able to use and have not yet, and I say yet, is the operative piece, made that part of our regular budget. But that's a quick.
So I think that's helpful directionally. That at least is paying voice to the fact that we have a bucket around it. If we don't think we're going to exceed the 500, that's good. Probably you need some flexibility there, but I think that's the direction at least Dan and folks like myself are thinking. That's a good start, knowing that it may change. I'm going to drop. I invite everyone, of course, to keep going, but I have to go help by a company. So
Yeah,
Me too.
I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very
Thanks,
much. This
guys.
is very
Bye,
helpful.
thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your
Sorry,
feedback.
Christine.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
any schedule, Doug, as far as meetings for you and then meetings to us?
Yes, I believe we have a meeting next Thursday or Friday. Let me look.
School committee?
Um,
The school
No,
committee is Tuesday.
School committee is the second and fourth Tuesday, standing meeting. I know, I'm not sure I'm following your question, Jim.
When do you, has already been lined up for you to come to finance committee? Has that been lined up already?
We do
For
not,
prel-
we do
Right,
not.
for
yet have-
preliminary, right.
There
we
is
do
a
not-
draft on page 2 of the,
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah, so it says to be determined, right?
Yep.
We don't have a date.
So we had asked about dates and hadn't heard anything back around meetings. And so, so I think, are you looking to make a meeting, Jim?
I'm looking, yeah, so I don't know, did you ask me about dates and I not get back to you? What did you mean by that?
No, we had asked
Uh,
about upcoming dates, about, you know,
So finance committee meets next Thursday, for example, and it's every 2 weeks on Thursday.
yeah,
So what I was trying to understand, I think you present a preliminary budget to school committee
yeah.
before you come to see us is your desire, correct?
So that's what we've done in the last 2 years, yes, we've done that last.
I
2 years.
think that makes sense because the full committee has not, right, Amy, has not been brought up to speed. Only our finance subcommittee has.
Yep.
So I think it would be premature to bring it to the full FinCom without going to the full school committee.
Yeah, and that's fine. I can talk to you early next week, Doug. I'd like to find out when you could come for step 1 and then when you could come again for the final. I know the final is kind of nailed down working backwards. I see that, but I would like to be able to tell them next week, it looks like we could see the school for an early prelim on such and such a date. That's all I'm looking for.
So the only week that we would have ahead of the 9th would be the week of the 1st.
Sorry, March?
Correct.
Right. So
So
you're meeting with,
Next Thursday,
Sorry.
we have a meeting, Jim.
Yep.
And so we have a meeting that evening. And so, but the following week, we have some open times.
Okay.
So are you meeting on the 4th?
we are meeting on the 11th.
Okay.
So that would be after school committee. So that would be actually better. And can I just ask Jim, what's the expectation that Doug and I bring to, you say step 1 and step 2? What's brought to step 1 that's not brought to step 2? Or is there any expectation or?
Well, basically, we see most people's budgets once, and we've asked to get a discussion with the school committee more than once, given the size of the budget relative to the overall town budget. So this overview that we looked at today could have been what would be brought to this first meeting. If there's one less scenario in this, my point is, as we listen to the other budgets and we're hearing, some numbers, what we're looking to do is just try to have you folks communicate with the full team, twice. Once where you think you're at an 80% confidence level, and I'm not looking for budget numbers, but you're down the road a bit now, and we think it's going to be like this. And by the way, we see sped concerns from the current year. We want to talk about that as well. Those would be the 2 things that I would like to bring to the table. How so far went, and where next year is going to be. Let Doug Butler ask, what's the salary year over year? If you know that, that's what I think the request has been, to see you a couple of times versus just once. Honestly, for buy-in, for the complainers to complain, for however you want to, put a frame around it. But honestly, when you half the town budget, I've seen you twice, for this team. be that we're advisors and who we are, I think is helpful.
I just have a concern about publicly presenting individual salaries publicly.
Right,
That,
so,
and having a
yeah, so
discussion about.
every other,
I just consider about having a individual salary conversation about individual. I mean, just publicly, that's all my concern.
sure, so, we see everybody else's salary.
So
Steve
this is
Mayo's, everyone. You know,
Right.
and let me just say, yep, Doug, go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Jim. Go ahead.
There isn't a lot of discussion about individuals. Let me give an example. We looked at the police budget the week before, and I commented, I said, geez, most of the police officers are around a 4.25, and I got this individual at 9, and I get this individual at 7. Why is that? You know, I'm not speaking about Mrs. Jones. I'm speaking about 9 versus 4.25. I mean, that was the discussion. So just to give you one example, Christine, there typically isn't enough time to run down all the people, but that's what Brian mentioned. You know, we get a spreadsheet. If the equations aren't in there on year over year, you know, we sit there the night before the meeting and we plug in the equation. So we see year over year on people. And then we see that, you know, we see the roll up. We know, personal services is, a 4% increase and the overall budget's 3.5. And then if we want to break down to the 4, we go do that homework. If we don't, we don't. And that's how it happens.
So I
At some point, the district stopped providing it, and here we are. Anyway, I personally, I don't have a huge amount of heartburn for it, and there's not enough time to get into it all anyway. In the meeting, to be frank. Now, do people opine about it at home when they review things on a Sunday? I don't know.
So it's public information, Jim. We can provide the information to the committee. So we'll provide it to the committee. I think that, so we'll provide it to the committee. I think we would just ask that you just, kind of think about what your questions might be in regard to having that information, right? And I would also ask that you be mindful. And I'm not talking about my salary. I'm just talking about, and I think the questions that you're asking about the police are the same questions that are going to come up about teachers. Why did Doug Lyons, math teacher at the high school, go from, why did he, if the average teacher increase is 4%, why did he go to 10 or 11? Because he moved vertically and horizontally, right? And that's what steps and columns, that's how they exist. Right. And so,
absolutely.
Right. And so that's going to be a question that I think people are going to want to highlight, right? Because some are going to be genuinely curious and others are going to be offended that this is part of an increase, that steps and columns are not included in kind of the overall COLA conversation. So this has layers to it. And again, we're just trying to, Jim, we're trying to be attentive to our responsibilities to school committee in regard to it's their budget, but we're also trying to be good partners and answer whatever questions that we may have. And we're also looking to not repeat sins of the past, right? And so, and you know how this goes, Jim. We've been doing this dance for a little while. When we go down this road of, back 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago now, we had an 11.4, we had a gentleman's agreement, we're at 4%. When we go down that road, all of those types of questions and behaviors lead to the same place, which is really us not communicating well. Right. And so we're just looking.
Yeah. Anyway, some people, you can communicate till the cows come home. It's not going to matter. Right. So the steps and lanes and the salary increases, I assume that's discussed with the school committee. And the school committee realizes when they negotiate, you're going to have steps and lanes. You're going to see 7% increases this year and 3% next year and then 9% the year after. And that's what their job is, right? And There's a number of people on our board that try to do everybody's job, and you're not going to fix that. But at the same time, I think if you provide the information, you'll be fully transparent, and I may have another bullet in my gun, but eventually it doesn't add a lot of value, right?
Got it. Got it. No, we can provide the information is the short answer.
And again, that's literally what happened with the police just a week ago, you know, and that's the end of it. And then I'm content with that. I'm not content with that. And I'm one of 15, and it is what it is. Again, that's enough said. You know, I assume the school committee does their job, and whether everybody does that or not is you know, they're humans. It's their personal choice.
Got it.